So there was a trend on YouTube a few years back where a whole bunch of creators made videos discussing their childhood trauma, specifically trauma connected to media they engaged with in their youths. I only watched one or two of these kinds of videos at the time, but I still thought it was a pretty solid idea, cause this is something many of us have experienced, watching some film or TV show or playing a game or reading a book that scared the absolute shit out of our dumb young selves. It was like one big old campfire where everyone partaking in the trend could share these experiences with one another and recount their own unique tales of childhood trauma. And even though the trend did cool down, like many other trends tend to do, it's not like this kind of conversation was unique to that trend. Case in point, I was chatting with my buddies recently about the kind of stuff that scared us growing up. It was pretty close to Halloween, and we had just finished watching Wet n Wild, which just so happened to be about childhood trauma, although a slightly different kind of childhood trauma. Anyway, when it was my turn to toss in the midnight dust, I brought up something we all found equally horrifying. But 'twas not a film, nor was it a game, nor was it some fucked up shit we saw on Live Leak circa 2010. Nope. It was that goddamn mountain climbing game from The Price is Right. You know, where those contestants have to guess the price of certain items, and if they don't guess the exact amount, the mountain climber man goes up the number of steps equal to how many dollars they were off by, and if he falls off the edge, they lose? That cardboard fucker being sent to his doom by those stupid idiots who wouldn't know the value of something even if they went on The Price is Right freaked me out so badly, I had to hide away every time it came on. Flash forward to current me, the guy who now laughs hysterically at Elvin Leeds' opening scene, and I think it's safe to say I've gotten past that particular fear. But of course, that wasn't the only thing to have scared younger me. To be honest though, I've either completely forgotten or completely gotten over most of my childhood trauma pertaining to media, so I can't really recall as many other experiences as, well, others have had. There is, of course, media that's attached to memories or certain frames of mind I had been in, but that's another matter entirely. However, there is one piece of media you could say has haunted me from my early days to, well, this past Halloween, and what do you know? It's a video game. Considering that, I figured I'd finally share my belated childhood trauma experience and hope to show just how unique these experiences can be when something as seemingly innocent as this could last in my memory for so long and still make me a bit antsy playing it. And that game is Clue for the Super Nintendo. Now, I imagine the first question that popped up in your head was a similar question that my buddies had upon the reveal of this tantalizing revelation. Evan, Jimmy Bob, Slap Happy Dick Sucker, whatever your name is. What the hell is wrong with you? A 16-bit adaptation of a popular board game? That's what you were afraid of growing up? And the answer to that is no. I was scared of 2 16-bit adaptations of a popular board game growing up. Although this was just an extension of the general fear I had with all versions of Monopoly because of that one image of the Monopoly dude showing his. It was especially frustrating because this also included that PC Monopoly game I talked about a while back, the one with the best game soundtrack out of any game that probably shouldn't have great soundtracks, so I was unable to appreciate it as much as I do now. Yes, it was a sad, sad childhood indeed. I eventually got over that though when I realized what I should have feared all along was capitalism, but that's neither here nor there because we're talking about a good old-fashioned non-political whodunit. Here's where things get weirder though. As I had also stated in that video, my younger self was more interested in board games than with video games at first, and Clue was not one of them. We had it, I still have it, but it's one of those games that requires at least 3 players to work properly, and I had only one other person to play with at most, so yeah, it didn't get played a whole lot at the Crazy Even household. I did try playing it by myself on occasion, but that wasn't a whole lot of fun either. No. If I was itching for some solo Clue, my only option was this Super Nintendo game. And yet every time I made an attempt to stick through a whole round, something about it just creeped me out to the point of shutting the game off and playing something else. Well, not anymore. There's enough real-life shit to deal with already, and some stupid board game ain't gonna faze me, so let's dig into this mystery game and try to unravel the mystery as to why my dumbass kid self was so afraid of it, as well as whether or not it holds up as a game, because of course I'm going to overanalyze some irrelevant trash. What else do you think is filling up the rest of this video? So here I am booting up this son of a son on my high-tier gaming computer that I haven't played any high-tier games with yet. I don't have the game, nor do I have a Super Nintendo at the moment. And up comes the title screen, some foreboding music, and then a little demo that plays out until you hit the start button. Boy, did I watch this demo way too much as a kid, and boy did it give kid me a healthy dose of anxiety every time. Definitely a good setup for what we're getting into though, but before we do, I have some facts to dish out regarding Clue video games I bet y'all didn't know about. This isn't the first attempt at a Clue video game. That honor goes to Clue, Master Detective, which adapted the then newer version of the game for home computers in 1989 and the year after. However, the good people at Sculptured Software were indeed the first to adapt the original game, and for consoles at that, releasing it not just for the SNES, but also the BeeJEEZus in 1992. Now, if that deaf name sounds familiar, you may recognize the team more for their work on the Super Star Wars trilogy, and the SNES ports for Mortal Kombat and Doom. But before then, they were most well known for, funnily enough, home computer ports for such classics like ARG. And who could forget their original titles like Street Fighting Man? I know y'all out there are very smart and don't take this shit for granted, but I need to state this in case there are any doubters out there. These games are real. I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. So Clue pretty much came out during a transition period in their career, and that's very apparent by how I couldn't find any credits for who had worked on this game besides who may or may not have been the composer. Maybe it was some contract thing, I don't know. Starting the game proper also provides us with a good opportunity to give a little rundown on how Clue works, in case any of y'all forgot. A murder has been committed in the Body estate, and Master Body is the victim. Oh, Body, I get it. Your goal is to deduce which of the 6 people visiting this large mansion did the dirty deed, as well as which of the 6 weapons was used in performing the act, and which of the 9 rooms within this mansion that this act had been performed in. 3 cards representing the 3 aspects of the crime are chosen and hidden away. You play as one of these 6 suspects and receive a number of non-chosen cards based on the number of players in the game, which can be used to rule out other suspects, weapons, or rooms. Players start from certain positions on the board, and play commences from Ms. Scarlet and clockwise around, through movement via a single die. Upon entering a room, the player will then suggest a possible scenario for Mr. Body's murder based on the evidence they have and whatever has happened during the game, upon which any player with a card in their hand that conflicts with the scenario will privately show that player that card to disprove that theory. Players can attempt to deduce the crime at any point through a single accusation, which allows them to look at the 3 cards to determine whether they've won or whether they're an idiot, and play continues until someone makes the correct guess and becomes a master dick. If you haven't realized, this is how a normal game of board game Clue goes. So let's address the first question that came to my adult mind, besides how the hell it could have possibly scared me as a kid. How the hell does this even work as a video game? Obviously, the power of AI can solve the whole minimum of 3 players issue, but the core gameplay mechanic is disproving theories via sharing cards to a single person, and you can't exactly be discreet with that on a single screen where everyone close up can see what you're doing. Well, Sculptured Slurpits tried to work around that in a few ways. First, anyone who isn't the current player has to look away from the screen anytime that player wants to look at their cards. The game can't exactly stop you from not doing that, but I guess they trust you enough to not be a killjoy. Second, instead of simply being shown a card that disproves a theory, or not being shown anything to likely prove a theory, a short cutscene plays out after any suggestion that shows whether or not that theory has any merit. Like, for example, here's me entering the ballroom and surmising that Mr. Green is the culprit and he had used the wrench to do it, and it shows that Mrs. White was in the ballroom, thus blowing a hole into my theory. Later on, another speculation is made placing Colonel Mustard in the billiard room with the rope, but that triggers a cutscene showing Mrs. White had the rope. And it continues so on and so forth until someone guesses it right. Now, if these clues sound a little too obvious for your tastes and you'd rather not have your detective work be a total breeze, thanks to their third workaround method, Sculptware provided 5 difficulty options to choose from at the start of the game, and the higher the difficulty, the less direct those clues get. Meaning there's less of, oh, this person was in this room, or they had this weapon, or there wasn't a weapon in this room, and more of, this person or weapon was not in this room. Good luck, dick. Luckily, players can rely on that little notepad included with the manual to help progressively eliminate any of these 324 possibilities. And if you happen to run out of them, you can order more by sending a letter to this address with a $1.50 in tow. Sorry for doxing you guys. Taking all of this in seems like it'd be a bit overwhelming, but I did manage to figure out these mechanics well enough, and I even started having fun with them. I do like me a good old-fashioned game of deductive reasoning, even if this is more like a deductive process of elimination, and those little animated vignettes do go towards giving the game a rather nice presentation. I can say with absolute confidence that this video game adaptation of Clue very much plays out like Clue. The problem is, it's Clue, and it comes with all the problems that Clue generally has. The movement mechanics feel oh so very unnecessary in a game that's all about using your brain, and even then, Clue works best in short bursts, because once you've solved one murder, you've pretty much solved all of them. And there's not a whole lot to offer outside of having more players to engage with and roast whenever they get something horribly wrong. Also, determining who goes first via one character rather than a die roll or a fight to the death is kinda stupid, because all that results in is people fighting over who will play that character, usually to the death. And the complaint train don't stop there, my friends, as there be problems specific to this game too. Those levels of difficulty may as well be retitled to levels of redundancy, and as you can imagine, I was stuck with 2 AI players through my various playthroughs, and them constantly making suggestions based on evidence that's already been proven to be irrelevant gets pretty fucking annoying after a short time. But most perplexing of all is the new mechanic Sculpt Gulp added that, to my knowledge, hasn't been in any other version of Clue either beforehand or since, and those are called interrogations. They're essentially accusations without any consequences for getting the wrong answer, and you get 2 of them throughout the game. I mean, yeah, it does help, but why they couldn't have just added 3 accusations in total per game instead of this, and frankly save more time, is something we'll probably never know, since again, we have no idea who was responsible for that. So with all these thoughts in mind, all of these tangible criticisms stated, let us once again swirl back to the original topic and ask, how does a dormant childhood fear come into play? What was it about SNES Clue that scared me so much, and did those feelings creep back in at any point during gameplay? Well... Yes. And I think I have some idea as to why. So this soundtrack here, I believe it can come off as just a little abrasive. In fact, it was so abrasive to my little ears that it painted over almost every part of the game with a larger sense of dread than I think Scoop Goop had ever intended. Most prominent were the portions of the cutscenes where it reveals who's handling which weapon or where a weapon was located, as it immediately cuts to said weapon or said character grabbing for said weapon, and then the music suddenly shifts to whichever theme plays out for that weapon. Even on a tiny ass tube TV, all of this crap made for a good old case of sensory overload, and it freaked me out. More so when paired with these character sprites. Now, I didn't watch much horror stuff growing up, and whatever I didn't find particularly creepy or scary, but the one horror-related thing that always did get to me is seeing an object or person center frame from a medium to long distance, and the darker the background or room had been, the scarier it would be. So these character sprites plopped into the middle of a black background and having these weird-ass expressions upon learning their stupid ass lost a chance at Mr. Body's fortune was a recipe for disaster for my young developing brain. No external stimuli, no traumatic moments happening right at that time. It was simply this image and this atmosphere. And playing 2 decades later shows that some memories can hold up to scrutiny. I mean, this isn't to say I was pissing and shitting all over my office chair anytime Miss Scarlet grabbed for the rope again, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't anxious during those recent playthroughs. But I have to admit, seeing these sprites at a higher resolution, I realized they look quite goofier than they did eons ago. And as soon as I learned that you could still win the game even if it turns out your character was responsible for shanking Mr. Body's behind, any fear I had with it had been significantly diminished. And I've really come to appreciate that soundtrack. It's very fitting for the mysterious vibe the game demands, and I really do love the way those pieces seamlessly transition into one another during those cutscenes. And I know it's kind of just standard SNES sampling instrumentals, but they kind of remind me of Donkey Kong Country 2 in some places, which is one of my favorite game soundtracks ever, so you get points just for that alone. And well, that's really all Clue 1992 for the Super Nintendo has to offer. Games like these live or die on the presentation, especially if you're not a fan of the original game. So I can't say that if you like Clue, there's certainly worse ways to experience it than here, but it's only worth as much as any other version of Clue can be worth. Certainly not $50 worth, though, if this press release is of any indication. Whatever reviews for the game I could find from the time were pretty mixed, if not outright negative, although some seem to prefer it over the SNES version of Monopoly I talked about earlier, which Scopalope had also been responsible for. I did play a round of that game just to see if any long-term fears would return here too, but no, it was just Monopoly, and the presentation here is not nearly as good. Couldn't find any sales figures for either game either, although I can't say it hasn't appeared on the list of million-selling SNES games, so they probably didn't do those numbers. With all this in mind, I was ready to say that Clue for the Snooze had been lost to the mental ether since then, as is the fate for many games of this sort, until I found out it's rather notable in the speedrunning community for being one of the quickest games one can speedrun. This and the 1998 PC game. It stands to reason, considering you just need to be able to guess the correct 3 cards, but you've got a 1 in 324 chance of doing that. At least that explains why prices on the secondhand market are a little higher than I had ever expected them to be. And speaking of that PC game, I did give it a look just to see if it was any better than the console version, and no, not really. But I will say, if I had played this instead of that, and well, it just would have scarred me for life. That is not how things went, though. It just so happened to be this one that I got scared of. And this is the kind of stuff that made all of those childhood trauma discussions so fascinating. Fear is a complex emotion that could potentially arise out of anything, even something as simple as a silly little board game. In this case though, that fear was only slight, almost temporary. There are some games you don't even need to have been afraid of that can stick with you in the weirdest of ways, whether you want them to or not. But that's a story for another day. So if any of y'all have any weird-ass fears for weird-ass games or other things you don't think anyone else has talked about yet, I'd love to hear them, even if you've forgotten why it scared you so much yourself. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all later.
Clue, the world's favorite murder mystery game. There's a victim of a dastardly crime in an elegant mansion, and 6 enigmatic suspects. But who did it, with what, and where? Solve crimes in exotic new locations. Take notes, make deductions, and catch the murderer. Play solo.
Miss Scarlet with the knife in the ballroom. I'm pretty sure I got this right. You're just not as slick as I am. Let's